This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one. Yeah, I got an email.
Had no idea.
There you go.
I think I've put Buzzsprout on my auto delete. All right, 10,000 downloads.
Talk it up.
It only took a couple hundred episodes and 50 people being faithful servants. I like that. Now, dude, I've been. I wanted to talk today about I think we've beat around this bush a little bit, so to speak, of asking for help, asking for mentorship, and really taking a proactive approach to, getting somebody on your team that's there to coach you and help you and maybe illuminate some things for you. And I've had some recent experiences, and that's why it was kind of on the front of my mind. And I think we've done a good job of saying, what? Like, here's the what. Go ask for help. Go get a mentor.
Yeah.
Be a baller, that kind of shit. But I think that's poor instruction because it's the equivalent of saying don't suck or suck less or do more, So, okay, well, how do we do this? So that's kind of where I wanted to dig in today. And my recent exposure to this is, I've just kind of had to lower a bunch of shields, man. I really had to lower a bunch of the bravado, maybe it's pride, maybe it's fear of rejection. I don't know what it was, but I really had to lower a lot of those defense mechanisms and just say, fuck it and go for it and start cold calling people. And I wanted to get into that just a little bit. I know you probably got some good thoughts on this, man. Although it seems like I'm always asking you for help. I don't know who you're asking for help. I'm curious, but just 5 minutes ago, we were talking about the training plans and all that. And I'm legit curious, like when you go out to run 10 miles, how do you fuel that? When you, do you stop in the middle and just rehydrate? Do you carry water with you? Do you do it in laps where you can kind of stop by the house, take a shit, drink some water and go again, because I'm starting to amp up my mileage a little bit for an event that I want to do. And so, at the end of the day, for the next hour or so, let's talk about asking people for help.
Okay. Yeah. Well, why don't you start with your experience, or maybe let's contextualize it a little bit first, just because I think it's important to maybe distinguish between how you approach asking maybe somebody for help in a mentorship role professionally versus asking for someone for help around something personally, or if you're facing like something big, like an addiction issue or depression or, asking people for help professionally. Right. So I think it's important to contextualize it, because I would definitely approach the asking for help from a mentor slightly different, I think, than maybe asking for help around a personal issue. But why don't you? I think you wanted to start kind of in that professional, looking for a mentor realm. So let's break that one down first.
Well, that's definitely a path, and I'm curious to see where this conversation goes, because I anticipate a lot of overlap, and I anticipate that those two processes aren't terribly different. Excuse me. A key component, I think, that's probably going to be the dividing line between those two is probably going to be trust at some point. And who you confide that into, like, and I'll just give you, let me just give you an anecdotal example here of where I'm at, right? So 16, 17 months ago, 18 months ago, I decided I wanted to start writing books. I didn't know the first fucking thing about writing books. So I started going on Facebook and looking for other authors. I know a couple of people who have written some books, but they're mostly like, these either self-help books or here's my memoir or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about like fiction novels, thriller novels, things like that. So I start going and looking around for guys that I might know, guys who are already in my network who have attempted something like this. And I found one or two and talked to them a little bit. And, they're more like, doing it for fun, just, a hobby on the side, something that kills some time for them. And I don't know, man, I think I started with a little bit more of a vision, a little bit more of a daydream than that. Don't really want to get into that too much, although I think that's a very important piece of this bigger puzzle is kind of knowing where you're going and knowing what you want, right? Seeing yourself walk across that stage or getting that award or whatever it might be, getting that promotion. So I think it's important to know where you want to be and then kind of reverse engineer it back to, okay, so how can I get there? And one of the ways that you can get there is identifying people who've already been there or already done that or gotten that award or walked across that stage, etc. So that's kind of where I went, and I used social media for it, man. I started friending people and following people and reading the stuff that they had put out there. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was building a network, which is kind of neat. It was inadvertent. It was accidental. And so anyways, fast forward to just last night, I'm at the point now where I have very specific questions that specific people can answer.
Yeah, that requires certain expertise, right?
It's no more of this like, hey, man, I'm lost in this fucking wilderness. Can you give me a cardinal direction? Right? Now it's like, okay, I'm no longer necessarily lost in the forest. I need the exact roadmap to get to where I want to go, right?
Yeah.
And so I messaged this guy on Facebook last night. Never met this dude. Just became friends with him on Facebook like 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. And it was like a fourth party connection. Like I friended this guy and then we chatted and then this guy and then that guy. And I just sent him a message, man. And I was very plain and direct, but, professional about it. And I said, hey, I'm Paul and I'm a retired Air Force guy, and I'm an aspiring author. You're also an author. I have questions. Specifically, I'm looking for like lessons learned, and he and I have a mutual connection, and we have a thread that connects us. So it's at the very least, it's a conversation starter, right?
Yeah.
But I was very specific with my questions and very specific with my ask from him, and he came right back and he goes, "Yeah, dude, let's talk tomorrow at 1. I got nothing going on." Like, holy shit, that was easy, right? So, but realize, man, that it took years, to get up to that point where I could lower all that, I got this shit, because that's the message that we were given for so fucking long, man. Is like, well, you're a fighter pilot, figure it out, right? You're a problem solver, figure it out. Go dig in the book and find the answer. We're going to do it again tomorrow.
You don't need somebody to figure it out for you. You can figure it out.
And sometimes, man, you need to just fucking, grab your sack and ask somebody for help.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot of good points in what you said, which is first, like, you talked about how kind of one introduction can lead to another introduction, right? So,
yeah.
And the important part of that theme that we talk about on the Be One Change One is creating opportunity, right? So, you by default, by reaching out to multiple people, not really knowing what may come of it or if they're even going to respond to you, has created kind of one opportunity that's opened the door to another opportunity, that has kind of allowed you to go down that path. I think you could also draw a corollary between I think sometimes too people find mentors potentially, that maybe that they get some really good stuff out of. But like you're saying, right, you had to get to a kind of a different level of specificity that maybe some of these other people that you had been talking to couldn't provide. So the other thing that's important to recognize about that is, dude, you may get a mentor that can take you to a certain spot, but when you want to go a little further, they may not be this. They might not be the right person to be able to continue to kind of help you out and carry you forward. That may be where they peak, right? It doesn't
that's a
mean
really good point.
It doesn't mean that you just shed them completely, right? Because you probably established a relationship. Maybe they can help you in other facets as new things come up down the road, but don't be afraid also to, it's that example that we've talked about before, right? Like the space shuttle, the boosters only take it so far and then they peel off. Well, if you want to keep climbing, dude, you gotta find whoever the main ignition burn is that's going to take you up to the next level, right? And so don't be afraid to pivot in those scenarios too, like you did, right? And find somebody who maybe can help you with a certain level of specificity that you need, or that can take you kind of to that next level, that has been in that arena, that knows the ins and outs, that can give you that feedback, that can give you that advice. I think those are good corollaries that we can draw just from what you've expressed so far.
Well, and I think I think there's some stuff left unsaid too. Like, for any process, for any program or any process, you kind of have to start big and then work your way down to the small, and we did that in mission planning and tactical sorties, and we've done it in our post-military careers through these different things, and you first start with kind of this big, I don't know, it's sort of nebulous. And when I was calling people at the very beginning, I was like, hey man, like, how do you put together a story that's 80,000 words long? How do you maintain focus for that long? Like, how many words should there be in a chapter? How many chapters should there be? And it was like these giant, just gross questions, like just completely vulnerable out there, showing my complete ignorance on this whole freaking thing. And you know what? You can read books on this. This is kind of like leadership, right? You can read books about it, and you can watch YouTube videos about it, and you can follow these social media people, these influencers about it. And this goes for whatever, the listeners might be aspiring to. You can watch and consume all this stuff and read all this stuff, but until you actually do it and start it, you kind of, I mean, there's so much that you have to just kind of learn by trial. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and I would imagine while there's a lot of corollaries in the writing process, or, I mean, when you talk about minutia, formatting, blah, 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 whatever, right? But I would also imagine that process is a little individualistic for each author. So you kind of have to figure out what works for you, the different ways that you approach it, how you tackle a subject, or bring in how you tie things together, maybe how you even write a book, right? Where you start, where you finish, where you fill in the gaps. So, but I agree with you in the sense that I think it's important, if you think about the process that you described at the beginning of the podcast. I mean, that's what you did at the beginning, right? You cast a wide net. You did a lot of information gathering.
Oh, sure.
You kind of throw it all out there, and you go, all right, I'm not really sure where to start, so I'm just going to start building a network, even though it was kind of inadvertent. And then, but the other big takeaways for what you had to say was, one, like, and I think this is really cool about what you just brought up around the cat that you recently contacted, who's like, yeah, dude, I'm free tomorrow at 1, let's talk. Is, I think people, I think a lot of times we're afraid to approach people because we're like, oh, I don't want to waste their time, or, blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what, motherfucker? That's not your choice to make. That's theirs. So ask the question. If they don't want to talk to you, they won't, right? And I think that what you'll find is you'll be surprised at just how willing a lot of people are to share that kind of stuff, right? To have those conversations, to pass on the lessons learned and the knowledge, to people that may be interested in that stuff. And then the other thing that I would just say to piggyback on what you were saying was, yeah, dude, the ego has to go, right? Because I can imagine that I know in my life at times, things that have prevented me from maybe reaching out when I should have or could have is ego,
it's ego and pride. Yeah.
Worrying about, shame. Like, are these people going to think I'm stupid by asking this question, or, I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to feel stupid. So I'm not going to ask, and like, yeah, I think it's easier as we get older because we just don't fucking care what people think anymore to a certain extent.
Yeah, maybe.
And I can understand too, though, that in a professional environment, how that could be scary, right? But you're absolutely right, man. You just got to kind of shed some of those barriers, or maybe even some of the messaging that you've had about yourself, right? Like, I can imagine when you sat down to write your first book, there might have been some messaging in the background that was like, dude, you're, a redneck from Alabama. You can't write a book, right? Like,
dude, I think that every time I open my fucking laptop.
Right.
What are you talking
there
about?
You go, right? My point in that is just that, there's this internal messaging that we have sometimes too that like, I think prevents us, and we just have to challenge that stuff.
Well, we haven't talked about these characters in a long time, but Stan and Jack.
Yeah.
Stan is a defeatist, man, and he's that voice in your head he's the voice in my head that tells me, dude, you got no business doing this shit. What are you doing? You're wasting time, right? But it's fun. No, it's going nowhere, man. Stop with your little delusions of grandeur here, and all that. So, but then there's the other side that's like, hey, man, if I'm gonna try it, then it deserves to have all the attention that I can give it.
Yeah, all the effort, right?
If I'm going to go in, I'm going to go in with both feet, and that goes to, that goes to your profession, that goes to your relationships, that goes to, anything that you aspire to. The things that we were talking about in the pregame, like, you have to be realistic, but also you have to give it the energy it deserves. And man, I can show you evidence here of the practice sessions and the background reading and copying and emulating, and I mean, just all the different things that I've done over the 18 months to try to get to a point where now I don't feel stupid.
Yeah.
I still don't feel good, but I don't feel stupid, right? And it took me a long time to send you one of my pieces.
Yeah.
Because it was that fear of,
judgment,
hey man,
right?
like, this needs to be fairly polished or I'm going to get laughed off stage here, right?
Yeah.
When you're practicing for a recital, you don't just run through Beethoven one time and then jump up on stage, right? No, you probably need to put some hours in.
Yeah.
And build some muscle memory and really learn the craft. And so anyways, what I wanted to get back to, though, with what you were saying was, I don't know if it's the age piece and the maturity, or if it's just, I've reached a point now where I almost feel like I've got nothing to lose by it. They're either going to say yes or no. I've been told no a bunch of times. I mean, a bunch of times, just emailing people, cold calling people, messaging people, and I get ghosted. I get told no, sorry, I don't have time, whatever it is. Okay, cool. Moving on to the next one, and
yeah.
It's that, I don't know, man, it's something that's just ingrained in us from the nature of what we did for so long. But as we say all the time, failure's not the end of the road. It's just whatever. You move on. You learn something. You move on. Maybe my messaging wasn't right in that. The way that I approached him. Maybe I reached a little too high. You don't just go straight for Mark Twain. Maybe you start smaller. And as you said, cast your net wider. And in the beginning, that I was catching in that very wide net. I was catching people who today I probably wouldn't message.
Yeah.
Because they're not aspiring to do necessarily the same things,
right,
that I am.
Yeah, but I think the point that you're making too, though, is it's iterative, right? And again, it goes back to the creating opportunity piece for me, because first of all, I think the first thing that I would say about getting no is not failure. No is just no, and no doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
If you ask somebody something and they say no, or they don't respond, or you get ghosted, well, guess what? Nothing's changed. So what difference does it make? Which is why you should never be afraid, in some respects, to do that. But yeah, I mean, it's an iterative process. And like I said, you were able to create opportunity to then find out about this person or make this connection, and that connection opened the door for another connection, and it's just kind of, that's how it works, right? It kind of grows that way over time. That's networking.
Well, and there's another piece too, that there's another piece to all this, and there has to be, I think, there needs to be a little persistence in there. So first of all, let's just walk it all the way back. And before someone asks for help or reaches out to their network or their people, their circle, you got to know where you're going, man. You can't, I mean, it's not going to do either of you any good to call up and be like, hey, I don't know what I want to do with my life.
I mean, you got to know what you're going to ask.
I can give you some ideas, but bro, like you kind of can't. I think you kind of need to know where you're going. Like, what's the purpose of this? Let's niche this down just a little bit, and maybe I'm going to call CAS and figure out how he fuels up for a 10-miler. Maybe I'm going to call Francis and figure out how to eat a box of donuts better. You know, and
exactly.
You know, so contacting the right people with the right questions. But kind of knowing where you're going. What's your goal? What's your idea? What's your end state? And then you can kind of walk that backwards. And when you develop your network, those are the people that you put in these little buckets of who am I going to ask? Which, like, I'm not necessarily going to call you and ask you advice on how to put together a 90,000 word novel.
I would have no advice for you.
You have strengths and you have weaknesses. And, you know, I would throw a 90,000 word novel probably not in your strengths category.
No.
So, you know, you're not my go-to question on that one. You know, and when I was talking about the persistence thing, if you know where you're going and if you know what you want and the specific question and the answer that you're looking for, and you ask somebody and they say no, or they say not at this time, follow up. You know, it's not like rejection. That's not the end of the road, right? And I can tell you from personal experience, it's taken 3 or 4 times reaching out to some of these people, and maybe they just got fucking fed up and aggravated and go, okay, I'm going to tell this guy something, so shut the fuck up. But it worked.
There you go. I think what's important too, though, about your point about having some specificity or being able to know what you want to ask and asking specific questions is, you know, when you reach out to somebody, you know, especially if they're maybe somebody who you've already built some sort of a relationship with, maybe not close, but you know each other. You ask them some specific questions. Maybe they can answer it. Maybe, you know, you reach out to me and you go, hey, Cass, I'm writing a 90,000 pound or 90,000 page book. And, you know, here's all the stuff that are words or whatever it is. Here's all the stuff. And here's all the questions I have. Yeah, maybe I don't know anything about it, but maybe my friend Joe Bob, you know, has written a bunch of them. And I go, you know what, dude, I'm not the cat that you want to ask these questions to, but I know who you can talk to. I know. So here, I'm going to put you in touch with. That's where specificity can really help you as well, because you may not be reaching out to the right person. You may think you are, but they may go, oh, yeah, that's not really my lane. But dude, I know the guy that does that. And let me put you two in touch with one another, because that would be a great way to do it.
Well, and that can happen either intentionally or unintentionally. And I'll give you an example of both. Intentionally, there's a list of guys that I kind of have on my Mount Rushmore, right? If I could sit down and have an hour-long conversation, these are the 4 or 5 guys that I'd like to sit and talk to and just pick their brain and learn and see how they do it, you know, and all that. One of them, I'm kind of, you know, Facebook stalking these guys a little bit, and I'm going through their friends list, and I realize that we have a mutual friend. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. So I message, I have him in my phone. I texted him. I texted this old friend of mine, an Army guy. And I was like, hey man, do you know so-and-so? He goes, oh yeah. We flew Apaches back in the day. And I was like, cool. Would you mind sending him a message and just, you know, give a third party intro? And he did. And we had a conversation.
There you go.
That's a I think a direct way to do exactly what you were just explaining about, you know, maybe finding someone or finding a connection that maybe you didn't realize you had a connection to.
Yeah.
An indirect way to do that, or to recognize it. And this kind of goes into recognizing opportunity and being alert, right? Just being alert and having some some situational awareness in your life. So I'm talking to Buster the other day. I sent Buster the same piece that I sent you, and he had some good feedback for me. He called me and we talked for like an hour, and he was telling me, you know, I like this, I didn't like that. Here's some things. And in that conversation, he says, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to get this wrong, but just pretend like it was like his brother-in-law's niece or something weird like that, some kind of out there connection that he had to a woman who had written like 20 freaking books."
Wow.
And I looked her up on Amazon, and there she is, man. She's a fucking bestseller, and she's got all these big books out there. And so that's an indirect, and it just kind of casually came up in conversation. And he says, hey, I happen to know this girl. Would you like to talk to her? Hell yeah, I'd like to talk to her.
Yeah.
So that's two different ways to get sort of to the same point.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You know what's cool about that example too? Because I was going to save this. I had written this note down and I was going to save it for the end, but flip the script for a second, right? If you're in a position to provide mentorship to somebody or to push somebody towards somebody who maybe can answer a question for them or help them on their path, look for those opportunities, guys and gals, right? Like, look for that. This happened to me recently. I was, and it was total happenstance, right? So I'm at the end of a trip and I'm supposed to deadhead home from San Diego. But my flight is like 2.5 hours after we land. But there's another flight that's leaving earlier, but the company couldn't put me on that one because it left before, like, our contract stipulates how much time they have to give us, this, that, and the other, right? So I get off the plane, I run over there real quick. There's seats available. So I drop my deadhead home, get on this flight, and I'm on an earlier flight home. Well, there's a flight attendant that's boarding with me that's going to work. She lives in San Diego. She's going to Phoenix. And so we kind of block off a row together and we just start talking, and she's super interested in aviation, decides that she thinks she might want to learn how to fly and become a pilot and all this stuff, right? And so, yeah, dude, I could give her all kinds of advice, I guess, but I didn't come up on the civilian side of the house. Like, and the military and civilian world are a little bit different. But I just not recently, but several months ago, flew with a gal who was, one of the first female pilots at Southwest Airlines, is like super senior, way up in the company, has done all kinds of amazing things. She's kind of in that same group she kind of runs in those circles where she does a lot of, women's in aviation type stuff and things like that. And so I go, you know what? Hey, I said, if you're really interested and you're looking for somebody to talk to, I said, I'm probably not your cat because I have a military background and I'm a dude. But I said, if you're interested, let me know, give me your number, and I will reach out to this other individual and see if they'd be willing to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And so she did, and I just shot the other gal that I'd flown with a text and goes, hey, this is what happened. This is who I met, super smart, super intelligent, motivated. I know you kind of run in these circles. Would you be willing to have a conversation with her? And she's like, absolutely. Like, send her my information, and send me hers, and we'll talk and get together. So I did that, and hopefully something comes out of it for the two of them. But I just want to make that point. Like, also, if you're in the position to be able to facilitate some of those things, make sure you take advantage of those opportunities for those people.
Yeah, for sure. I did something almost identical to what you just described. Some friends of ours, their son wants to get into aviation. He's just graduating high school, and he has this dream of being an airline pilot. And so they were asking me all about it. And I said, well, okay, so first of all, not an airline pilot, but I know a bunch. All right. So I can put you in touch with a bunch of airline pilots. However, what I really think, and that's kind of like if this kid called you, you're going to give him the ins and the outs of the industry, and you're going to talk about what it's like, the day to day and stuff like that. And I just think that that's probably a little over his head right now. Like, maybe one of these conversations just to get an idea of what you're getting into. But if that's the source of your information, your information, for one, is going to be dated, and you didn't follow the same path, right? And so I recommended as hey, I know a kid who's working his way up from the ground up, graduated high school, got his PPL, got his instrument. He's all the way up getting a CFII right now. And so maybe that's the kid that you need to talk to. Their ages are closer together. They're only about 3 or 4 years apart. And he's doing the same path that you're looking to pursue. You're probably going to get better, more tangible, actionable information out of that guy than you would talking to a 50-year-old seasoned airline pilot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Dude, you're spot on. And you know what? This so parallels what you were talking about before, where, when some of the people that you first started talking to aren't the people that you would talk to now, right? And I want to say it was when we read Hidden Potential it was in one of Adam Grant's books. I don't remember if it was Hidden Potential or another one that I've read, but he talks about the fact that, like, if you're looking for mentors, you kind of need to be particular potentially about who you ask. Because if like you just go straight to the CEO, he's so far removed from what you're doing and the questions you have, he probably doesn't even remember or know what you're talking about, right? Like, or even in my case, or maybe a guy that came up on the civilian side, but that's in a similar situation as me. Things have changed so much, probably, in how they do training now, and like the sim capabilities and computer capabilities, and you're not going 8 hours to ground school at the community college to figure out FARs anymore. You know what I mean? Like things have changed so much that they may not be the best one for you, right? So that's a really good point that you made. Like you want to make sure that the people that you're asking potentially to help mentor you in a process are actually people that are going to be capable of kind of meeting you at whatever level you're at.
Well, I've got this young enlisted Air Force kid asking me how to get his education completed while he's on active duty, which is something that I did. I utilized the tuition assistance program and the Montgomery GI Bill, and I got all of my education paid for while I was working active duty. But dude, that was like 25 years ago, you know? So any information that I give you, I mean, I can give you some anecdotal stuff. Like I can tell you how difficult it was and how you need to learn some time management skills and things like that. But my best advice was go to the education office. That's what they do.
Yeah, talk to those people.
Their whole purpose is to help you through that process. So go make contacts over there and go start talking to them.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Yeah. So get back to, how. So we talked a lot about the what and even the why, but the how is the how to ask for help. And again, taking it like Cass said, just kind of in a professional sense, or searching for information kind of on a project that you're working on, or whatever. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's at home, something like that. First of all, I would say analyze your network. Well, step one, know where you're going. What exactly are you after here? What's the end state that you're looking for? For me, it would be, I want to get picked up by a traditional publishing house. That's kind of, if I had to say that I had a goal, I've never actually written that down because right now I'm still kind of fumbling my way through it. But eventually, that's what I'm going to write down, and I'm going to put some timelines on it, and I'm going to put some particulars, back to our goal setting mantra and all that. But if I'm reaching out and talking to people who are not traditionally published authors at this point in my process, then I'm probably not getting the best information that I can get. So that's, I've shifted my focus. I've analyzed my network of people, and now I'm targeting the people who do have that experience, and that's where I'm starting to ask these types of questions versus maybe a self-published author or somebody who just wrote a book for fun for him and his kids or something like that. Great information in the beginning of how to put it all together, what software do you use, how long do you write every day, et cetera, et cetera. But now I'm to the point where I'm very specific and I know which path I want to go down, and those are the people that I'm targeting. So analyzing your network so that you can pick out those individuals who will get you the information that you need at that time.
And what if you don't have a network that's like that?
Well, then building it from scratch, like I did. Cold calling people or social media. This is one time where I will actually advocate for social media. LinkedIn is a great resource. I've used Facebook because, the reality is like Instagram and TikTok are probably a generation below us in the mass amount of users that are on those platforms. Whereas Facebook is more our age people.
Yeah.
And those are the people I want to talk to. I don't want to talk to a 25-year-old who just wrote a book. I want to talk to a 50-year-old who just wrote a book because we've got the same, we've got the same stories from our lives. We've got the same battle rhythms. We've got we're in the, our kids are gone and we've got time and, we're so much more similar than the younger people are. So I, between LinkedIn and Facebook, I just search for authors. And, you find one guy, you send him a friend request or a connection on LinkedIn, and then you go down his list of people, and you found, oh, well, there's 3 more, and you start connecting and you start building. And, once you go through, and this is not like a 1 hour long process. Like, you're not going to sit down on a Sunday afternoon and complete this. This has been going on for 18 months for me.
Yeah.
Maybe even before that, because when back in 2019, 2020, when I was writing No New Lessons, I sort of started this process back then. I didn't realize it at the time, but I kind of started it way back then. So, I mean, this has been going on for like 4, 5, 6 years for me, of just slowly collecting these people into my network. And now I'm to the point where I've got some people who are in specific niches that I can ask very pointed questions to, maybe even send them examples and get feedback from them.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I mean, I think that's it. You may not have a network around you that can actually facilitate. I think when we interviewed Mike Burke, Legends of the 75th, retired, Master Sergeant in the Army, Command Master Sergeant in the Army.
Yeah.
Mike said when he got out, because of the path that he ended up on, going and, doing the Chief of Staff program and things like that. All of that was him at the beginning, after getting out, like just getting on LinkedIn and going, I'm going to make connections and send a message to 20 people a day and see what happens, right? Because he wasn't sure what to do. He didn't even really have a direction of maybe where to go, and that led to one thing after the other, and like I said, that iterative process of just having a conversation with this person, getting a little information, led to an opportunity to talk to this individual, and next thing you know, he's kind of on his way. So there's validity to that.
Well, and there's something unspoken there too, and what Mike was doing, and certainly what I'm doing, is like, I'm not making these connections necessarily for these people to this is going to sound weird. I'm going to throw it out there and then we'll have to massage it a little bit, but take me under their wing and push me through the program. And here, I'm going to hold your hand and take you over to the publisher and introduce you to the guy. That's not necessarily what I'm after, although that would be really nice. But I understand that there's a rite of passage to this. Nobody fucking knows me. I'm an unknown quantity. So respecting those people's time and not, what's the word I'm looking for? Not expecting a free handout from them, I think are two things that are really important in this whole process. Is when you do get to the point where you can ask these people, like, what was one of the first things that I told you after you called me and we talked about the thing that I had sent you. And I've told everyone this. Anyone who's read any of my stuff, I tell them the same thing. I'm like, guys, like, it's not lost on me that when I ask you to do this as a friend, as a favor, as a critiquer, as somebody that I'm asking for feedback from, that takes a tremendous amount of time. Like, how long does it take you to read a full length novel? Some people might take a month or more. That's a lot of time that I'm asking from you that you could be doing something else. You could be going out to dinner with Alicia. You could be going for one of your long runs or whatever, but you chose to spend that time with me. And that's not lost on me. And I'm super grateful in all that. So I say, when you do ask someone for help, be respectful of their time, because they're doing you a favor.
Yeah, they are. Yep. And show gratitude's a good thing to show as well.
Yep.
Okay. What's the next step that you have, Roscoe?
Well, going back to being very specific, I write out a couple of questions that I'm going to ask this person first. So far, the people that I've cold called, that I've talked to, we have some kind of common ground that we can draw on, right? And I know you're not a fan of small talk, but starting a conversation and being authentic in that conversation, that's to me, it sort of is the lubricant to this whole thing, right?
Sure.
So when you're authentic with people, and for me, it's so easy for me to call somebody. Like, I've got a phone call scheduled this afternoon to talk to a guy, and one of the first things I'm going to say is, "Hey, dude, like, I don't really know what I'm doing here, and I'm collecting information, so thank you." Right? And so when I throw that out there out front, so far everybody's reaction is, "Hey, dude, it's all good, man. Like, you're doing the right things. You're asking questions, and But that usually comes at the end of, hey man, so, we got connected through so-and-so. How do you know him or her? Or, I saw that you were an Army vet. Like I spent some time with the Army and I speak a little bit Army, so finding that little bit of common ground to kind of let everybody kind of relax and start talking and whatnot. And that's part of that authenticity of it. It's
sure.
not, I'm not going to start the conversation with like, all right, glad you accepted my invite. I appreciate that. Here are my 5 questions. Go with your answers. Like, it's probably not the best way to handle that one.
Not if you want to build a relationship.
Establish some rapport, establish some
commonality.
I mean, it's now I think there are times and places when you might want to be very direct about that.
Sure.
And if you're going into the CEO's office for something and you know that his time is super limited, you might have to go in there armed with 2 or 3 questions, throw them out there real quick, get the answers and walk away.
Yep.
But in this, what I'm talking about, and when we're talking about this type of mentorship, like when you expressed this to me offline one day where you were talking about joining this little running club that you did. And you didn't really know what you were getting into, and you thought it was kind of gay at first, but then you realized that, like, hey man, we're all here for the same reasons. Yeah. We're all out here to have fun. We're outside. We're doing good. And you started a conversation, and then that led to questions, and they provided answers. And
yeah, it all works that way, right? I think anytime that you can, in the situations that you're describing, I think the CEO contrast is a good one, right? There may be times where you're limited on time, so you need to, which that's important, right? Another good question to ask somebody is, how much time do you have to talk?
Yeah.
To think, hey man, I've got 15 minutes, then you can prepare yourself for what you want to get out of that 15 minutes. And I think
maybe that's when you be more direct.
Yeah. And then maybe that's when you be more direct and you go in and maybe you have 10 questions, but these are the 2 most important ones and you lead with those, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's important to do, because I think if you show people that you're serious and that you've actually thought about this and that you're prepared when you sit down to have those conversations with them, it's going to lead them to open themselves up to more conversations down the road versus if you come in there and they're like, what do you want to talk about? And you're like, I don't know what to do with my hands.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, all right, we're done. And don't fucking bother me again.
Sorry,
right?
man.
So
I
don't
got
have time
to
for this bullshit.
Yeah.
So I think that the prep that you're talking about, I think is an important piece of it. Like, no, have an idea, spend some time to think about what you want to talk about, what you want to get out of the conversation. And it may vary as you start to discuss things, but I think that's good. But in general, finding areas of commonality, anytime you can express to somebody that you've chewed some of the same dirt, I think it opens up an opportunity.
Yeah.
I think it does exactly what you were saying, which is, it kind of gets that person to go, okay, I know where this cat's coming from, right? Like, I already understand that, portions of him. So this should be a pretty easy conversation to have, right? And it does kind of, I think, relax the environment a little bit.
Well, in a case like the conversation I'm going to have this afternoon, probably leading off with a lot about me is probably not the way to go. Thank you for your time. I'm Paul. Good to meet you. And then maybe start asking him some questions about him, because everybody likes talking about themselves. This is not your opportunity to walk in with your big billboard about all the shit that you've accomplished. Now, that's not to say that there may not come a time when you may have to, in order to get to where you want to go in the conversation, you may have to throw out some of the evidence that you're serious about it. Like, hey, oh, by the way, I thanks for that bit of feedback. I appreciate that. I've actually written 3 books and self-published them all. So I'm not totally unfamiliar with the process of putting together a project like this and then putting it out to the world. So, in the beginning, when I was talking to people, it was super big picture, universal type questions. What software do you use? How do you organize this, that, or the other? Do you follow a 3-act structure? Do you kind of do, so it was those kinds of big picture questions. Now I'm to the point where I'm like, hey man, so I've got a couple out there. I actually, last year I wrote 4 books in a year. And I'm to the point where I'm ready to start putting it out to the world. And I'm looking for next steps, and I see that you've done that. So you've gotten to the point where maybe I want to go or I aspire to. And so I'm curious about, do you have any lessons learned? Do you have anything that you would do differently if you're given the chance again? What was one thing that you learned along the way that you wish you'd have known in the beginning to maybe cut a corner or to make that line a little straighter? So those are the types of questions that I'm asking now versus like, hey man, how do you turn your computer on in the morning? That kind of shit.
Sure. And I think it'd be good for us to talk about it just briefly for a second in maybe a more normal professional context. Where maybe somebody's, at work at a company and is wanting to find some mentorship and maybe the steps are the same, I think. But again, I think like the first thing that you want to do is target somebody who you think has value added that can give you, good feedback or potential mentorship, but two, that's at the right level. So, depending on what you're interested in doing, maybe it's a middle manager, maybe it's somebody below a middle manager, maybe it's a department head, maybe it's probably not the senior vice president or the president, the company that you have these questions for. But then two, how do you break the ice with that? Like what would be recommendations that you would have for, okay, yeah, I don't really have maybe rapport with this. Maybe they're over me, maybe they're in a different department, but I'm interested in maybe trying to work in that department. What do you do? How do you even broach that subject? Like what would your advice be to somebody in a situation like that for maybe how to seek out that initial conversation and contact?
Well, so far in my experience, the conversations that I've had where I've had rapport have always been better than the cold calls. Now, that's not to say that by the end of a cold call, depending on how long it goes, that we can't get there. But, you're talking about two strangers that are sitting down to have a conversation that has a point. And sometimes it takes a while to get comfortable talking to this person. You don't always click. I've had that happen too. Like, oh man, God, this is a dud. I mean, the guy's super smart, but he just can't. He can't.
Personality wise,
personalities don't mesh. So those would be things like I would, if I were talking to a person in a work environment who maybe wants to move up a rung or run a project or something like that, find somebody that who has some experience doing that, because having that established relationship is just going to make that conversation a little bit more, it's going to make it a little easier, I think.
Yeah.
And probably just a little more relaxed overall.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And if you're I would just suggest that if you're in a situation like that, or if you're in a situation where you don't have something like that, and maybe you do have to make it more of a cold call, but it's in that professional setting, then I would just, approach an individual, introduce yourself, and then just say, hey, I have a couple questions for you if you'd ever be interested in that. And if I could buy you a cup of coffee sometime or something like that, like, that would be awesome. And then just see what they say, right? And try to get on their schedule. A lot of times I know, even with senior leadership in the military, maybe for guys that I had a relationship with or didn't, but needed to ask questions of, sometimes it was just simple as introducing myself, going, hey, this is who I am. This is where I work. I have some questions for you. I know you're busy. Is it okay if I call your secretary and get on your schedule? Something as simple as that. And they'll be like, yeah, dude, absolutely. Just get on there, or they'll go, what do you want to talk about? And I'll go, well, I was going to ask you about, oh, well, I'm probably not the guy for that, but talk to Colonel so-and-so over here. Right. And then you just kind of go through that process until you find the right person. But that's one way to approach it as well.
Yeah, but you did two or three things in there that we already talked about, right? Yep. One, you respected his time, right? And two, you knew exactly what you wanted to ask. Yep. You were very specific about the ask, and I think that that's important, right? And it can't go overlooked. You can't. I would find it very difficult to believe that you would walk up to a complete stranger and go, "Hey, can you be my mentor?" Yeah. And they go, "Yeah, hell yeah."
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
you look like a good dude.
Like, I like your shoes. Fuck yeah, come on. Like I don't know that that's probably you're probably not going to catch as many fish doing that approach
for sure.
as you are with what you described and what we've already talked about in this 48 minutes is Be respectful of their time. Hey, sir, I know you're super busy. I do have a couple of questions. Do you mind if I go through the process, the correct process, get on your calendar? That way, that if you have a segment at a time, dude, we did this when I was trying to get the youngest boy some letters of recommendation for the academy, right? Cold called the wing commander's secretary and said, hey, does the general have any time in the next month or so where he can give me 10 minutes to meet my son and maybe consider giving him a letter of recommendation? Very specific ask, went through the process, respected his time, didn't ask for a whole lot, just 10, 15 minutes if he's got it at the end of his lunch break or whatever. And she got me on the calendar. We went met with the dude, had a letter of recommendation already written because I know generals don't like to write. Yeah. And so, boom, he signed it right there on the spot and we were done, right? Yeah. So exactly what you're saying, right? We had a very specific thing that we needed or wanted that we were asking him for. And if he would have said no, okay, no big deal, right? We did everything that we could. We controlled the things that we can control. We went in prepared and it ended up working out for us.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think that's great advice.
As we start to kind of turn the corner towards the end here, on the back end of it, after you've kind of gone through this, one thing that resonates with me is, well, a few things. One, I always want to reciprocate and offer something back. Although at this stage of where I'm at, I don't really have anything.
Yeah.
Now I have run into a couple of people. I have had a couple of conversations with guys. More than a few, where once we get through the conversation and they find out my background and I learn their background and maybe some things that I have some working knowledge of that they're interested in.
Sure.
For projects that they're working on, and go, hey man, if I ever need information on, how to do a dog fight, I might call you up. Yeah, dude, give me a call, man. I can regurgitate the 3-3 for you, and so,
well, and even if you can't reciprocate in that professional manner, I think that's where it's great to extend gratitude, right? So I would encourage anybody, if somebody does give you their time and meets with you in the next day or two after, follow up with a phone call, an email, a handwritten note that you drop off at their desk or secretary that just goes, hey, I just really want to thank you for the time you gave me, and the advice or however you want to phrase it. And just let them know that you really appreciate that, because that's gonna keep that door open. I think, if they're doing it the right way, they shouldn't expect it. But I'll tell you, as somebody who's mentored a lot of folks, when you get that, it feels good, and you're like, all right, it's good, dude. If he barks up my tree again, I'll definitely have another conversation with him. It just kind of greases the skids for maybe the next opportunity.
So let me throw this out there of how that kind of comes full circle, and I'll try to keep this condensed because I just found out that I'm on a little bit of a timeline here with Katie. So back in October, November timeframe, I got asked by a publisher to write a book, and I started putting it all together, and it's a book about my career. And me and my editor were sort of going back and forth about who we might get to write a forward for the book to do a couple of things. One, highlight it very well, and two, sort of draw attention to it, as an attention getter kind of thing. And I thought of this guy, the list of people who have been instructors in a Strike Eagle, a Viper, and an F-35 is not as big as you might think. It's a fairly niche down community. I could only think of, between 6 and 9 people total who had gone down each of those paths. Excuse me. So one of them happened to be a retired general. He also happened to be my a squadron commander of mine back in the day. So I have a rapport with this guy already, right? Yeah. So I called him up and we started talking, and I asked him, I'm putting together this project. Would you mind being involved with it? This is, this would be the requirement. I can help you with it. If not, and I was upfront with him, and I said, hey, I think he asked me, he says, well, why? And I said, well, I mean, and I listed out what I just said about the list of people who have been instructors in these 3 platforms, but I'll be completely honest with you, man. This is selfish on my part because I want the credibility on the cover that, somebody else, somebody who's high ranking believes in this project. And he goes, I'll tell you what, he says, send me your rough draft and I'll read through it. And then I'll give you an answer, because right now the answer is no, but I'm willing to say no, but, all right. Maybe. Or not at this time. Yeah. So I sent him the rough draft, and I was sitting at the NASCAR race up here in March. I'd sent it to him a week before, and he was on vacation in Hawaii. And he called me while I'm up on the hill watching the NASCAR race and says, hey, dude, I'm in. Whoa, okay. Well, I mean, that's like a 180. What happened? He goes, it's great. I love it. And I'm in, right? And I told him after he wrote it and we polished it and everything, and I sent it off to the editor, and I called him back up and I said, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. And this is, again, fostering and circling back and maintaining that rapport and everything. Thank you very much. I wish that I had some way I could reciprocate. I have nothing to offer you right now. But thank you. And I'll make sure you get a signed copy. I mean, that's like the best I can do at this point. Yeah. All right. So fast forward, all right, to about 3 weeks ago, that same guy calls me up and goes, Roscoe, I hate my fucking job. Do you have any openings where you work? And so we started a conversation, and he's going to start working for us on our team here in a couple of months. Yeah. So that's awesome, man. So the whole point in that conversation is be grateful, right? And foster those relationships. Be polite, be specific with your ask, be honest and authentic and open, because you never know when that might come back around to you. And now you have the opportunity to mentor. And I mean, this conversation between he and I over the last 3 weeks, it was like almost every day for an hour or two at a time, answering questions, giving him the goods and the bads, so, we experienced this when we retired out of the military, and we really didn't know where we were going to go or what we were going to do. And so we started asking people who'd been there and done that. And I had a mentor. I had an 06 that kind of mentored me through it and helped me with my resume and helped me make some connections and things like that. And I told him, man, I really just want to come to your house. He lives in Tucson. I said, I want to come down there and spend the weekend with you and just buy you a bottle and say thanks, man. Yeah. And he goes, no, dude, just when it's your turn, just give it back. Yeah. And I think I think a lot of that when it comes to this mentorship shit, that's kind of how you put a bow on it at the end, is when it's your turn, give it back. Yeah, make it full circle. I think that's a good place to end, brother. Well, all right. Unless you got more that you want to say. No. I think that I had a list of things, and I think that as I said before, I think it kind of put a bow on it and tied it up nicely. Yeah, absolutely. So, set a goal, be specific. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Lower those defense mechanisms. Yeah, what else you got? All that stuff out of the way. Be the change. All right, be the one. Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence. You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's B and the number 1, change and the number 1.com. We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1Change1 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com. You can email us from the website, and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on. Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.